Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a weekly podcast bringing readers and writers of Australian fiction together. I'm Claudine Tinellis. As an avid reader and passionate advocate for Australian fiction, I make it my mission to spotlight local talent. So if you're looking for your next read or simply want to learn more about the Australian literary scene, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and relax. Listeners, my next guest is described as the undisputed queen of Australian women's fiction, an apt description for an author with a whopping 29 titles under her belt, an award-winning author with her own online book club and close to 5,000 members. Of course, listeners, I'm speaking of the one and only Rachael Johns, and I'm delighted to be chatting with Rachael once again on the eve of publication of her latest offering, The Workwives. Welcome back to the podcast, Rach.
Oh, thank you, Claudine. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, you're so kind. I know we caught up at RWA in Fremantle in August, but when I was thinking about the last time we chatted on the podcast, I realised it was 3 years ago, almost to the day. Hard to believe, isn't it?
I can't believe that was the last time I actually was in New South Wales as well, I think. And for just one wish and thinking, I used to travel quite a lot over there. And yes, we all know why, but it's been a long time.
Feels like yesterday to me that we were chatting about Just One Wish, but that was for you, as I said just before we started recording, 4 books ago now. Now, let's go through them. There was Something to Talk About, which was your rural romance in April of 2020. Then there was Flying the Nest in November of 2020. Then How to Mend a Broken Heart in May of 2021, followed by Outback Secrets in October of 2021, and now The Workwives. My goodness, Rach, I'm exhausted just reading this list out.
Yeah, well, when you put it like that, it seems exhausting to me as well. I always think people ask me, how have you written so many books? And I've got friends who have written way more, in that time. So that's what I always think. But then I look back and I actually go, I don't know, because say, for instance, the last couple of weeks I have not been writing because I've just handed in a draft of next year's book, and I'm thinking about what I'm writing next. But there's no point for me starting before I go away on tour, because then I have to stop again, and so I'm having a bit of a break, which is lovely. But I sometimes then wonder, how do I actually fit in writing around my day? Because you seem to be able to fill up the day with all these other things as well, life admin, work admin, seeing people, reading. And I'm like, how do I normally fit in the time? Time's a weird thing. As you said, it feels like it's been 5 minutes since we've seen each other, but it's actually been, has it been, before the RWA. But actually it's been quite a long time. So your time is very odd. And I think making the time to write is very odd kind of as well. But if you do it, just sit down at the desk regularly, then, the words add up.
Given all of that, worrying about time to write, you're still incredibly productive. But I wondered if you worry that you'll ever run out of ideas, or you worry that you won't be able to keep up this kind of momentum.
Definitely. Well, I have slowed down a little bit. For most of my writing career, I've written 2 books a year. Sometimes more, sometimes there's been a novella in there. There was a couple of years where I wrote a few books with Mills and Boon as well, so I had to squeeze those in. And after the Mills and Boon books particularly, I felt quite burnt out. So I decided to write 1 book a year for a couple of years, because I just really felt I needed the break. I was really struggling, as I said, with ideas and just sitting down to write. And then I felt a bit better again. I wrote a couple of books. It's funny, I find my writing life goes through... The whole publishing is a roller coaster, up and down, but even just specifically the emotions regarding my writing. And so then I took a step after I wrote, 2 books in a year. I said Something to Talk About, How to Mend a Broken Heart again. But now, then the next 2 years, I've stepped back, because I did have quite a bit of a time where I was feeling like, I think writer's block, there's 2 types of writer's block. I think there's story block, where you're just stuck in a story and you've gone the wrong way. But then I think the other one, I've heard it just described as life. Or burnout, and I definitely had that. So I stepped back again for a couple of years, but now I'm feeling quite energized. 2 books a year, like 1 book a year almost is not enough for me. That makes sense. I read a lot more, but I don't really know what else to do with myself.
Rach, having just finished your latest offering, The Workwives, I'm in awe of you all over again. You've pulled off another wonderful novel. It's, as I said before we started recording, it's multifaceted, and you're exploring so many contemporary issues in the context of an engaging and yet quite hopeful story, I think. So I wanted to say congratulations. And how are you feeling about its impending publication?
I'm feeling reasonably good. I mean, you never can make everyone happy. There's always going to be people that love it and people that hate it. And I've already seen, that in reviews. And I think also when you write in two different genres, even though my genres are quite closely related in terms of romance and then more contemporary general fiction, you have some people who like one more than the other, and they go into the book with certain expectations and they're not necessarily met. But I'm excited because I think, as I mentioned before, I'd gone through, before writing this book, quite a period of feeling quite anxious about my writing, full of doubt. And I really realized that what I needed to do is just rediscover the joy in writing. Because I think when the pressure gets on to, write multiple books to pay the bills, it's easy to go, oh, I have to do this. And when you have to do something, often it becomes not so enjoyable. And if you're stressed, you're stressed because you have to earn money, then that adds a pressure. And so I really worked really hard prior to this book, between the last one, of taking a step back. I had a month of social media. I really worked on reading more, watching TV more. I started doing sewing again, making my life not so book related. That really helped me bring the joy back. And so this book, it really was a joy to write. I loved getting to know Quinn and Deb. I also think, as you said, I've written a fair few books, and some of them have felt more manufactured than others. And what I mean by that is I've had a contract. You asked if I had lots of ideas, and I wouldn't say I am a huge ideas person. I have things I would like to write about, but how to put them into a story is always where I kind of, stress and worry. But this title came first, and then the story kind of unraveled, and I knew it was almost what I was going. Like, I'm not a planner, but I could see a lot farther ahead in this book than I usually do. And so it was really a joy to write. Like, I would sit there sometimes, which I haven't done for years, and just smile at the computer screen and think, oh my gosh, I love your book. Of course, I want people to enjoy it, and, I want it to sell, but I'm happy because it gave me back my joy for writing. And so that's almost enough, if that makes sense.
Absolutely makes sense. I tip my hat to you, because it can't be easy to find the joy in something that you have to do, or that, you're working to a dedeadline to. Sometimes I feel like that about reading.
Yes, yeah,
So
I
I
know,
totally
especially when you
understand.
have a podcast. I know what you mean. I know a lot of writers and podcasters and bloggers, and feel that way because it's a joy. You obviously do it because you liked reading in the first place, and same with me with writing. You come to it because you love it. No one sort of decides, oh, I'm going to write a book or I'm going to start a podcast. I don't want to. I hate this, but like, I'm going to do it. But then it's like you get given. It's almost homework, isn't it? You've got books you have to read, which you may love to read if you didn't have to read them.
Yeah.
But then also you've got to sometimes work. And I find that with, being given arcs and stuff, it's such a joy. And I'm like, I'm so lucky that I get these books. But then I think, but I've got that pile of books that I've bought myself that I really want to read instead. And it's just, we just need more time. That's the thing. Or I need to read faster. Read faster would be good. Yeah.
Yeah. I think time pressure is the issue here. It's just when you have to do something within a certain time frame, and you're human, you're balancing family with work, with wanting to catch up with friends and doing fun stuff like attending RWA,
and all that stuff is very important because it does refill the well. But yeah.
Absolutely. No, I totally understand. So, talking about finding your joy with this book, was there a particular spark of inspiration? And I know you said the title came first, but what was it about that caught your eye and that just made you decide, I wanted to craft a story around this?
Yeah. So there's sort of two answers to that. The first is the title, but I had then some other things that I'd already wanted to write about that I suddenly realized could fit in with the title. So the title came, it was because of a podcast I did. I did a podcast for Brand You magazine a few years ago, probably about 2 years ago. And the interviewer just mentioned that it was Friday and she was looking forward to Friday night drinks with her work wives because she had another job kind of as well. And although I've heard the term work wives, many times, I'd at that time been reading a book about, it's called The Bestseller Code. It's sort of a book that analyzes all the best-selling books in the world and shows, what they have in common. There's a section there about titles, and it's a fascinating book to read. I remember being told titles like, The Family Secret, The Bad Sister, 3 words, really things that it can tell you about what the book is. for instance, my cousin has a book out called The Summer Job, and she had a different title to start with. But the publishers chose that book, The Summer Job, because immediately you think, oh, I've had a summer job, or I know what summer job means. It's kind of like, it has all these connotations that can't kind of come with it. So I was in that sort of headspace, just thinking about titles. And so when Rowena said My Work Wives, I just suddenly thought, I said the Work Wives would make a great title. And I didn't even necessarily plan to do anything about it, but it just then refused to leave my head. And that's when a story idea sort of came to me of two women, at least, I wasn't sure at that stage, who worked in the same building, well, really good friends, but really different, and they'd only become friends because of work. And then I sort of went from there as what kind of could happen. But the other thing that kind of, a few other things sparked my idea. And, I think writing's a lot like kind of doing a jigsaw puzzle. I've got lots of things, as I said before, that I would love to write about, but I haven't found the right thing to put them with yet. So they sit and sort of mull around in my brain for sometimes years, and some will never get written probably. And one of the things two things that I really wanted to write about was I'd seen a lot of talk about addiction to dating apps and how, the swiping left or right apps like Tinder and Hinge and Bumble and all the other ones actually is akin to the pokie machines and the sort of the buzz that you get. And I saw that, some people were, reluctant to sort of settle for anyone, because what if the next person, what if they settled for one guy and then the next person they swipe was actually better? So it kind of, and I thought that was a really fascinating thing to explore. And the other thing I'd seen was an old article that was doing the rounds on the internet about how to find your husband in 129 ways, I think, to find a husband, that was in an old McCall's magazine from the 1950s. And it was just hilarious, all the different things that were in there, like get a dog or paint outside an engineering school, wear a Band-Aid, and I just thought, oh, that's really fun. I'd like to put that in a book. So, that's, I guess, the Work Wives title came first. And then there was other things that I started, I had wanted to write. And I thought, oh, maybe that will fit with that. There's also a funny little thing in there. There's a little bit of a budgie angle in there, very small. But last year I was at the Capricorn Coast Writers Festival, and there was a local MP there, and she came quickly and got a few of us to sign books. And then she's like, I'm really sorry, I have to leave, because I've got to get up. It was an evening thing. I've got to get up early tomorrow morning because I'm going to the award ceremony of the local Budgerigar Society. And I was like, what? There's a Budgerigar Society? And I had a budgie at the time. Sadly, he died. I was like, I love budgies, and this just sounds like such a fun thing. So I was thinking I might have a whole book about a Budgerigar Society, but then it kind of fell into this one instead.
That was one of the most interesting aspects of this book. And I absolutely loved that, as somebody who's had a fair few budgies in my life.
They are very special birds. We had a budgie for 11 years, and he recently died. He's actually in the acknowledgements of this book, because I said, if you're still alive by the time the book comes out, it'd be a miracle. So yeah, sadly he's not. But I do love budgies, and I just thought it was a fun angle. And in all my books, like as you said, there's some serious issues and stuff, but I also like to really include some fun things, and the budgies, I suppose, were a present to myself as well.
Oh, absolutely loved it. Okay, so having said all of that in relation to what inspired you to write it, can you tell us a little bit more about the story?
Sure. So the Work Wives is about three women really, but two adult women who work at an energy drink company. I say that they're as different as Downton Abbey and Schitt's Creek. So we have Quinn, who is in her 20s, late 20s, and as I said, addicted to dating apps. She's a really bright, bubbly personality. She works in digital media in the company. And then we have Deb, who is the complete opposite. She's in her early 40s. She only wears black, whereas Quinn wears, bright colours. And she's quite a quiet person. She works in the accounts department. So, you can see the differences. And she is a single mum of a 15-year-old daughter. And whereas Quinn is desperate to find the one, Deb has sworn off men. It's a fun story, but there's also a little bit of a darker element in there. When one man turns up at the office, I won't give two spoilers, it kind of throws a spanner in the work of their friendship. But I think the fun angle was that, yes, Deb sees Quinn addicted to dating apps and thinks that, she's got a bit of a problem. And Quinn realizes this, and then, Quinn decides she's going to give them up, but only if maybe Deb gives a go of dating, and Deb, that's a very terrifying thing for Deb to do. So they're both, challenging each other to step out of their comfort zones. And then you have Ramona, Deb's 15-year-old daughter, who's studying at a new school, who's never really fit in before. She loves vintage fashion and all things that are 1950s and stuff like that. And she's desperate to, find friends and find a place in the world. She's very close to her mum, but, as we need in fiction, there's some tension between them that comes about in this book too. So I think I managed to explain it hopefully without any spoilers, and hopefully that gives enough of a taste.
I want to talk a little bit more about the mother-daughter relationship between Deb and Ramona later. But interestingly, this book was set in Sydney. I mean, I loved that it was set in Sydney.
Yeah.
But given that you're Perth-based, why here? And do you think this story could have worked just as well anywhere else?
Yeah, I think it probably could. It's funny because I don't necessarily. I just decide where it's going to be. But I don't think of it like I've written in all my women's fiction books. Obviously, all my real romances have been country towns. I think until this latest one, all in Western Australia, and they've been fictional. Whereas all my women's fiction novels have been mostly more city based, and they have been in South Australia, in Perth, in Melbourne. I just realised Justin wishes Melbourne, and in New Orleans, and then Sydney now. It's a feeling. It's a bit like choosing character names or titles and stuff. It's like a gut feeling. And for me, I think this office, I haven't worked in an office myself for a long time. I did briefly when I was about 21. And, I've worked in retail environments since then. I've worked in schools since then. And then for the majority of the last 10 years, I've just worked by myself in an office, in my own office, which is very different to the office in the book. And so I don't really know the office environment very well. The only office that I've really had any experience with in that time is my publisher's office, which is in Sydney in a very tall building, on the edge of Hyde Park. Basically, I just stole that office. It's not a publishing company in the book. As the book it evolved, so the synopsis that I started with very loosely, to say that this is the type of book I want to write. It was going to be more office based than I thought, and in the first version before it was edited, it was a lot longer. It's a pretty long book, but it was like 100. I think my first draft was 165,000 words or something. So and it needed to be cut, and a lot of what was cut was actually office scenes and other things going on in the office, because that was important when I first wrote the book, but then it became more about the relationships, between mother-daughter, between friend and neighbor, and different things like that. So the office, and that's why I know I've already seen a few reviews, people complaining that the title doesn't necessarily match the book, but I still think it does, because that's how they became friends. So yeah. Hope that answered your question.
Absolutely, it did. We've talked a little bit about this before, but, I'll say it again. What I especially love about most fiction written by women at the moment, but yours in particular, Rach, is that you explore issues prevalent in women's lives, and yet you do so in a way that's not preachy or judgmental. And some of these are weighty topics, as you've mentioned. So I wanted to ask, do you, when thinking about your writing, do you think about themes and issues that you'd like to deal with? I know we talked about, ideas, but themes and issues that you'd like to deal with, or is it always about character first for you?
Yeah, really good question. And thank you for your lovely words. I think it's more about character, and then sort of, because as I think of the character and what they might be going through, the issues kind of come. Like often I will actually know, often I do think about it beforehand, but then often the issues that I think I'm going to explore are not the ones that end up being explored. And that's more probably in the last couple of years. I know when I first wrote my first few women's fiction books, someone said, "Oh, you're an issue-based writer," even in the rural romance. And I was like, am I? Like, I think of Jodi Picoult being an issue-based writer, and things like that. But then, they say, "Well, you've written about this, and I think, it's organic. Like, I guess maybe it's a subconscious thing, things I'm fascinated about or interested in, like addiction to dating apps. Obviously, I'm an old married woman, so I've never experienced any of that. But I think it's, very interesting the way the dating landscape has changed. I do often have themes of like family, I suppose, in there. And especially in this book, I'm pretty close to the Ramona story of identity and not knowing who her father was, because I had that for 17 years of my life. It's not exactly the same as Ramona. I knew who my dad was, but I didn't ever meet him until then. Yeah, I guess you explore things that are important to you. But sometimes I also have like a list of things that I would love to explore that I haven't, managed to or haven't found the right way. I had an eating disorder in high school. My mum and my cousin both had a different eating disorder, and it's something that's really close to my heart, but I just haven't worked out how to do it. There's a few other things that I'm really interested in that I've had in my head for a while. So I often think, actually, I'm just realizing talking to you that the things I want to write about, but I can't just write about an issue. So I think I have to find the character has to come to me first, and if then it's almost organic or magic. I like, oh, hang on, they're the character that I need to do this issue for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. I completely understand. But I'm always fascinated by the process. What comes first for different writers, And
Mm,
sometimes, as you say, it might be a burning desire to speak about a particular issue and, finding the story that fits. Or is it the
yeah.
other way around?
For me, it changes probably. Some are more character based, or I'm just thinking, I think the seed of an idea comes to me, but then that's the character has to come next, and the character is stronger. If that it's really kind of bizarre thing. I
Mm.
mean, 'cause I'm just thinking, I'm looking at pictures on the wall. I had a book, Flying the Nest, a few years ago, which I did want to explore nest parenting because I thought that was a really fascinating sort of thing that people did, and the character came immediately after that, and because of nest parenting, which is people feel separating, their kids stay in the same house and they take turns going there. I immediately needed a couple that were separating, so they came next, but then who they were shaped how the story took place, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
So Deb and Quinn, the two adult women characters in this book, about as different as two women can be from each other, and yet become the best of friends, as you say, Downton Abbey versus Schitt's Creek. Um, were these characters inspired by real women?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. I don't think so. No, definitely not. I love Graham Simpson's analogy that he uses, is that the right word? Where he says, characters are a third yourself, a third people and a third your imagination. So I think that's definitely probably the case. With Quinn, I do have a bit of an addiction to Instagram makers of like clothing and earrings and things. I had to mute a whole load recently because I just they make the most amazing, gorgeous outfits and dresses, and I'm like, I can't buy any more. I don't need to wear any more clothes because I had never leave my office except for tour. And how many earrings does a person need? So I definitely, Quinn is kind of inspired by the people I've been seeing on the internet the last few years that are just full of joy and color in their lives. It's dopamine dressing, and they love that. And Deb is not really inspired by anyone except saying that she, I guess, is more my age, so I can relate to her in some ways. She's also, the name Deborah Fast was bought by one of my readers at an auction quite a few years ago for, I think it was bushfires. So she's been very patient because I had to wait for the right character. I'm very much particular about names of characters, so they have to kind of gel in my head, and I thought Deb was the right name for this character. And then another lady was the reader who helped me when it was a lot more office based. She was a payroll manager, so I took her job from her, but yeah, not in terms of personality really.
So, despite being best of friends, Deb's keeping quite a major secret from Quinn, isn't she?
Mm. Yes, she is.
And,
I
and
wasn't
Quinn's not
sure.
happy about it.
No, she's not happy when she finds out about it
Yeah.
because I wasn't actually sure that she would be keeping the secret, or whether Quinn knew the secret. So I had, it changed my mind quite a few times as I was writing about what Quinn knew and how much she knew. I think how much she knows is right in the end of the story. And yes, she's angry because, well, she's angry at first. I don't think this is a bit cryptic for people who haven't read the book. I don't think she would be angry if other circumstances weren't surrounding it. I think she would be more understanding because she is a caring, understanding person. And I think she knows, that we all keep secrets in our lives for the right reasons. I think most people, when they've got a secret, they're not doing it to hurt anyone, or they're usually doing it to protect themselves or to protect loved ones if you're holding something back. And I think Quinn would understand that if it wasn't that the secret affects her life and she's angry about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as the mother of a teenage daughter, I really felt for Deb on so many levels. She had sacrificed so much to raise her daughter in the best way that she knew how. And Ramona was intent on pushing boundaries and didn't always treat Deb respectfully. Now, knowing that you have three sons, did you find writing about this mother daughter dynamic difficult or different, or how did you get inside this headspace?
Not really. I mean, I was the daughter of a single mum. So I've been in Ramona's space, definitely. But the relationship between a single mum and a daughter is a very unique kind of relationship, especially, because you've got nobody else for a lot of the time. And the line between friendship and parenting can even be more blurred, I think. Because of my own experiences, I think it was kind of, not a hard thing to write. And also, I have plenty of friends who have teenage daughters around the same age. So, yeah, I think the hardest thing about writing a teenage character or teenage point of view is the language, and I'm guessing that boys and girl language is different again. So there was things I had to cut out because the editor's like, well, would this really be a teenage girl speak? And then you don't want to put in too current words in case that dates them. So yeah, I think that's the hardest thing writing a teenage character is make. But then at the same time, I'm not writing a YA novel, so I figure I'm writing for mostly, women in their, probably 30s onwards. That's probably my major demographic. And so they're not necessarily going to know all the, it's the emotions and stuff that we can relate to because we've all been teenagers before. We all understand the fear of not fitting in, the things about first love and things like that. So although it's something that's a concern for me, it's not a huge one because whereas if I think if I was writing YA, it would be a much bigger concern.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, speaking of fitting in, I reflect that, Ramona's behavior is largely influenced by the fact that she was bullied in the previous school she attended and that now she's at a new school. And so her behavior, I think, is largely reflecting her desire to fit in. Was this something that you particularly wanted to deal with in this novel?
I'm trying to recall exactly how that. So no, actually, from the beginning. So I am quite an organic writer. I don't have necessarily a good idea of plot before I start. I do generally have quite a good idea of character. Like I've thought a lot about that, but sometimes I have to start without having a very good idea of what the characters are going to be like or what their issues are going to be. And for this story, definitely Ramona was the one I struggled with sort of in the beginning. Obviously, there's an overarching plot between the three of them, but they each then had to have their own things going on. I would say that Deb is the main character in this book because everything sort of revolves around her. And it's interesting because it's a book by Lisa Cron called Story Genius. And a few years ago, I was reading that book and discussing with Lisa Ireland. We disagreed that there's a point in there that every book, even multiple point of view books, have only one main character. And we were like, no, that's not true. And I still agree that that's not always the case. I think in a few of my books, the multiple point of view characters have been equally as important. But then there's other ones where I can pick out who sort of the story is. And I think this one, that is Deb. So I knew kind of what Deb's issues were, not actually what had happened to her in the past exactly. I was hoping as I wrote that would reveal itself to me, but I knew that there had to be something quite awful that had happened to her to make her the way she was. I kind of knew a bit more about Quinn, but Ramona, I had very little idea of what sort of her goal of the story would be and what her issues were. So they kind of changed a lot as I went along. That issue came along the way. I did not ever set out to write kind of about that.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is bullying, the fact that,
Yeah.
there's, she was a victim of bullying and
Yeah.
she almost in a way did a bit of a 360 on
Yeah.
that.
That issue came along the way. I did not ever set out to write kind of about that. I actually had other issues for Ramona that maybe she would be dealing with her own sexuality and wondering, where she sort of fit. But that just didn't work out because I fell in love with Elijah, who's the budgie person, and I wanted to give them a lovely romance. That's why I really take direction from the characters. And I did initially in the first version try to sort of force a different storyline on Ramona, but then this story was the one that sort of came out, and I guess needed to be told maybe.
Yeah, indeed. And I absolutely loved Elijah as well. I thought he was just gorgeous.
Yeah, I had to give them a happy for now because they're only young.
Happy for now, indeed. I love that. You were talking earlier about the fact that this was Deb's story, or mainly it was Deb's story. And I think, it's fair to say that apart from Quinn being in her life, she led quite a a lonely kind of lifestyle, just bringing up her daughter and going to work and coming back and not doing anything really, not socializing apart from with Quinn. But as the story goes on, she builds a bit of a community around her, and community is such an important element of this story, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. She does. I think she's been fearful to make connections because of the connections that she's had in the past that have all let her down. And she's so protective of Ramona that, doesn't want to really let her out of her sight to start with. So it's hard to have, adult friendships and relationships when you all constantly got your child around. She learns as Ramona kind of breaks off. I think it's both Ramona and Quinn that are challenging her to step outside her comfort zone, because she learns that when Ramona loves her, Ramona doesn't want their relationship to change in a lot of ways, but she's 15 going on 16 and she wants her own life as well. She's craving friends, she's craving independence. And so I think, Deb is forced to decide to, just stay the same as she is and be lonely because her daughter's going to go and have a life, or to do some things that are uncomfortable for her. And I think there's probably a lot of us that, parents that are in that sort of situation as your kids get older, whether you're coupled or alone, you have to readjust and decide what else you can do for yourself. And I do think, community is really important. And you talk, it takes a village to raise a child. And I think that's the one thing that's been missing, or one of the things that's been missing in Deb and Ramona's life. She hasn't had a support system. And it's hard to get used to that support system. But also when you realize, when you do start accepting for them, life is better off because of it.
Now, talking about a village, you've often said, or I think you actually said in the back of this book, that it takes a village to write,
Yep.
to help a writer write a book, I guess, if you want to put it that way. And you have, I think one of the amazing things about you, Rach, is that you've got an incredible network of people around you, a network of writers. So I wanted to ask you, how important to you is this network? How important to your writing is this network?
Everything. I mean, I think writing, they used to say writing was a solitary thing. I think some people, still do, because as I said, we're stuck in our own little place that we write, our own head a lot of the time with imaginary people. So, it can be dangerous to your mental health, I think, if you just stay there. But I think that's not really the case anymore. It definitely isn't for me. My network is really important because I feel like I'm not alone in this career, which was, once possibly very solitary. I met pretty much all of my writing friends through the Romance Writers of Australia in the early days before I was published. And so a lot of my friends have gone through the same sort of things at the same time as me. And, we all understand that the industry is wonderful when it's wonderful, and it can be really disheartening when it's, not. You can have highs and lows so close to each other. It definitely is like a roller coaster. And I've been really lucky, I have to admit. I've had a few setbacks. I think without the people around you that understand that, I mean, you can have a supportive family and that's really lovely, but nobody kind of understands the industry unless they're in it. So I think it really just helps you through the good times and the bad times.
Rach, the last time we chatted, I asked you if you had any tips for people who are aspiring to be authors, people like me. But maybe this time I wondered if you would share something that you didn't know about yourself before you were published.
Tough question. I didn't know about myself. I probably didn't know oh no, that's a lie. I probably didn't know how stubborn I was and how persistent, because it took me 15 years to get published. But I do know that I was stubborn because I pursued a boy for 5.5 years or something in high school. So, that's pretty stubborn and persistent. What have I learned about myself? I think I have learned that I can do more than I think I can, if that makes sense. I really do struggle with doubt and, as I said, imposter syndrome. And it's taken me a while. I would say until like last year, I didn't really feel like a real writer, even though I had lots of books published. And I think what made me feel like a real writer is actually going through a really dark spot in my writing and a low point, and being able to get through that and write another book I've realized, you can do this if you really put your effort into it and your heart and soul into it. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Absolutely.
I've learned I'm more resilient, I think, than I would have thought.
Thank you for sharing that. Rach, you've coined your style of writing, or particularly in relation to your contemporary fiction titles, life lit. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if you could
offer any insight as to why you think this genre is so popular with Australian readers at the moment?
Yeah, good question. I think because we can relate to it, I suppose. If you're saying life lit, I mean, I came about that as because I wasn't sure about the women's fiction term. I always think historical fiction, you can understand what that is. Crime fiction, you can understand what that is. And I guess all of those different things have their own appeal. But I think this genre in particular of contemporary sort of fiction about, everyday people experiencing issues that we all can relate to is because it's, you can understand the universal emotions and you feel connected. You feel like these people are people you know. And I guess reader emails and feedback that I get from people is that they felt seen, often in like they've experienced, whether it's a divorce or, infertility or sadness and grief. They're huge emotions, but universal ones. I think people like experiencing or reading things about that other people have gone through the same sort of thing as they are going through at the same time, or they know someone who has. It really feels, and it's a comfort read, I think, in a lot of the way, because most of these books do end on a hopeful kind of note, even if they're books that are weepy books, as we call sometimes throughout, or they explore dark issues. They usually end. That's what I love about them. They end in a hopeful, happy way, and you feel, it's a joy to read books like this. I think. I mean, I like reading crime kind of books as well, but I think, especially in current times, where the world is such, a scary place sometimes and can be quite depressing. I think it's that whole term. I don't mind the term beach read. A lot of people think, oh, beach read is, or airport read or whatever. But to me, that's just a read that, takes you away from your everyday life and gives you a few moments, a few hours of, joy and excitement and reprieve. So I think that's why I think people just need a bit of happiness and escape in their life. And it's not hard to read these books because they're everyday, you're everyday people and you can relate.
I always find this a little bit awkward to ask, particularly when this book is just, it's not
Ooh,
quite even out in the world
this
yet.
question now? I'm curious.
Not that revolutionary, I guess, but I what's next for you?
I've just submitted my next book, which will come out at the end of next year. The working title was The Reinvention of Adeline Walsh, and it is linked to my books Talk of the Town and Something to Talk About. Something to Talk About you mentioned earlier that came out. It's a standalone novel. I wrote about a character that was not a very nice character in Talk of the Town and Something to Talk About. I never intended to write about her. I really need to learn from my past self because I've done this before. In my first book, I wrote a nasty nurse, and then people wanted a second book in the series, and she was really the only character. So then I had to redeem her and work, And I think I managed to do that okay in The Road to Hope, which was the second of that book. But I never thought I'd have to do it again. But then people liked, some Adeline is a character that people love to hate, I think, in the other two books. And so my publisher was very keen to have her story and know why she's so awful. And I didn't know why she was so awful. And I couldn't do the same thing that I've done with the previous character. So it took me a while kind of to get around what was going on in her life. And then one day I was just sort of thinking, well, I've read books like Thornbirds, with a priest as the main character as a love interest, but I don't know if I've read a romance with a nun as the main character. And so I decided that Adeline was going to join a convent and become a nun, and that her hero would be a atheist and absolute hate religion for reasons of his own. So I had a lot of fun writing that book. I'm really about the fun again. I've really tried to, I want to write a book that I can enjoy going to the page, every day. And so that book, that's what I've just finished.
Fantastic. Oh gosh, it sounds amazing. And I want to say I can't wait to read it, but I'm going to have to wait a whole year for it.
I have to wait a year, but it'll go quick. We know how fast time goes.
So true. Rach, I find it hard to believe that anyone listening to this podcast would not know who you are or where to find you. But in case there were listeners out there who've just discovered you, where can they find you?
So I'm online at www.rachaeljohns, it's Rachel with an A, johns.com. I'm also on TikTok recently.
Oh my goodness.
I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I've also got an online book club, as you mentioned, the Rachael Johns online book club, which I run with a really good friend of mine, Anthea Hodgson. So that's a great book community if you want to discover other book lovers. We do a different book each month, and no pressure. It's not like homework. You have to do it.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rachel. Look, I absolutely love The Work Wives, another triumphant novel. Thank you so much for joining me on Talking Aussie Books once again today.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
That's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please drop me a line via my webpage at claudinetinellis.com, via Instagram, Facebook or Twitter. Alternatively, consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or Google Podcasts. Until next time, happy reading.